I'll never forget the Christmas dinner when my stepmother slapped me in front of the entire family. She had no idea that my quiet husband sitting beside me secretly owned the mansion we were eating in, the company that paid for everything, and basically controlled her entire world. What happened next will shock you. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if the story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Hey everyone, I'm Natasha, and today I'm sharing the most humiliating and ultimately satisfying Christmas experience of my entire life. Let me take you back to that fateful December evening that changed everything between me and my stepfamily, forever. My name is Natasha Winters, and I'm 27 years old. My life has been a complete roller coaster, especially when it comes to family dynamics and finding where I truly belong. Growing up, I lost my mother when I was just 8 years old. It was devastating, and for years it was just me and my dad, Thomas, trying to figure out life together. He worked so hard to give me everything I needed, but I could see the loneliness in his eyes. When I was 16, he met Vivienne at a charity auction in downtown Riverside Heights. Vivienne Ashford was everything my sweet, humble mother wasn't. She was tall, blonde, perfectly polished, and came from what everyone called old money. Her family had been wealthy for generations, owning several successful businesses throughout the tri-state area. She carried herself like royalty and expected everyone around her to treat her accordingly. When Dad announced they were getting married, I was honestly happy for him. I wanted him to find love again, and Vivienne seemed to make him smile in a way I hadn't seen since Mom passed away. But what I didn't anticipate was how dramatically my life would change once she became my stepmother. Vivienne brought her own daughter, Clarissa, into our family. Clarissa was 2 years older than me, and from day one it was clear that both she and her mother saw me as an unwelcome addition to their perfect world. They moved us into Vivienne's family estate, a massive Tudor-style mansion in the most exclusive part of Riverside Heights, complete with manicured gardens and a staff of housekeepers. Suddenly, I went from living in our cozy 3-bedroom house to this intimidating palace where I felt like I was constantly walking on eggshells. Vivienne had very specific ideas about how a proper young lady should dress, speak, and behave. She enrolled Clarissa and me in the same prestigious private academy, bought us designer wardrobes, and insisted we attend etiquette classes and charity galas. The problem was, I never felt comfortable in that world. While Clarissa thrived in designer dresses and loved being the center of attention at social events, I preferred my comfortable jeans, cozy sweaters, and quiet evenings reading books. Vivienne constantly criticized my appearance, my posture, my choice of friends, and especially my lack of interest in the high society lifestyle she was trying to force on me. "Natasha, darling," she would say in that condescending tone that made my skin crawl, "you simply must learn to present yourself better. People judge you within the first 5 seconds of meeting you, and right now, you're not making the impression a young lady from our family should make." Despite the tension at home, I managed to do well in school and eventually got into Westfield University on an academic scholarship. I was so proud of earning that scholarship on my own merit, but Vivienne seemed embarrassed that I needed financial aid at all, as if it somehow reflected poorly on the family's reputation. College was my escape. For 4 years, I got to be myself without constantly being compared to Clarissa or critiqued by Vivienne. I studied business administration and worked part-time at a small bookstore cafe near campus called the Reading Nook. It was there, during my senior year, that I met the man who would completely change my life. His name was Jonathan Reed, and he was unlike anyone I'd ever met. He came into the cafe every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, always ordered a simple cappuccino and a chocolate croissant, and would sit in the corner booth with his laptop for hours. He never wore flashy clothes or expensive jewelry, just simple button-down shirts, dark jeans, and worn leather shoes that looked like they'd been well-loved for years. For 3 months, we exchanged small talk while I made his coffee. He asked about my classes, my plans after graduation, and seemed genuinely interested in my dreams of maybe opening my own business someday. He never talked about his work, never mentioned money, and never tried to impress me with stories about expensive restaurants or exotic vacations. When he finally asked me out, it was the most genuine, sweet invitation I'd ever received. "Natasha," he said with this shy smile that made my heart skip, "would you maybe want to have dinner with me sometime? Somewhere we can actually have a real conversation without the espresso machine drowning us out?" Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant off campus. Nothing fancy, just good food and the best conversation I'd had in years. Jonathan listened when I talked, asked thoughtful questions, and made me laugh until my sides hurt. For the first time in my adult life, I felt completely comfortable being exactly who I was. We dated for 8 months before he proposed, and during that entire time, I had no idea that Jonathan Reed was actually Jonathan Reed Blackstone, CEO of Blackstone Global Enterprises, a multinational corporation worth over $4 billion. He lived in a modest apartment near the university, drove a simple sedan, and never once made me feel like there was this enormous secret between us. I only found out about his wealth when he took me to meet his parents at their estate, and I realized that their family home was essentially a private resort, with its own golf course and helicopter landing pad. Even then, Jonathan was so down to earth about it all, explaining that he'd wanted me to fall in love with him, not his bank account. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I've met too many people who only see dollar signs when they look at me, he told me that night as we walked through his family's garden. With you, I get to just be Jonathan. Not the CEO, not the heir to a fortune, just the guy who loves chocolate croissants and thinks you're the most amazing person he's ever met. We had a small, intimate wedding ceremony 6 months later. Just our immediate families and closest friends, exactly the way we both wanted it. Vivienne, of course, had opinions about everything from my dress choice to the venue, but for once in my life, I didn't let her criticism affect my happiness. Now, 2 years later, Jonathan and I have built this beautiful, quiet life together. We live in a comfortable but not ostentatious house in Millbrook, about an hour from Riverside Heights. Jonathan still goes to work every day like any normal husband, and I recently started my own small consulting business helping local entrepreneurs develop their business plans. The one thing that hasn't changed is my relationship with Vivienne and Clarissa. They still treat me like the awkward stepdaughter who never quite fits in, never quite measures up to their standards. And honestly, I've made peace with that. Jonathan loves me exactly as I am, and that's all that matters to me. But this Christmas was going to be different. This Christmas, Vivienne's attitude toward me was about to cost her more than she could ever imagine. The invitation to Christmas dinner at Vivienne's estate arrived in early December, written on her signature cream-colored stationery with gold-embossed lettering. The Ashford family cordially invites you to join us for Christmas Eve dinner at Willowbrook Manor. Cocktails at 6, dinner at 7. Formal attire requested. I showed the invitation to Jonathan over breakfast, and he just smiled that gentle smile of his. Whatever you want to do, sweetheart. I'm happy to spend Christmas with your family if that's what would make you happy. That was so typical of Jonathan. He never complained about my complicated family dynamics, never made me feel bad about the tension between me and Vivienne. He just supported whatever decision I made and somehow managed to stay neutral in all the family drama. I think we should go, I told him. It's been almost a year since we've seen them, and maybe it's time to try again. Besides, I'd love for you to see Willowbrook Manor. It really is beautiful during the holidays. The week leading up to Christmas Eve, I found myself actually getting excited about the dinner. Maybe this year would be different. Maybe Vivienne and I could finally find some common ground, some way to coexist peacefully as family members. I spent way too much time picking out the perfect outfit, wanting to strike the right balance between respecting Vivienne's formal attire request and staying true to my own style. I finally settled on a deep emerald green dress that Jonathan had bought me for our anniversary. It was elegant, but not flashy, expensive, but not obviously so, and it brought out the color of my eyes in a way that made me feel confident and beautiful. Jonathan looked incredibly handsome in his navy suit, the one that fit him perfectly but didn't scream designer labels. As we drove toward Riverside Heights on Christmas Eve, I felt optimistic about the evening ahead. Willowbrook Manor was absolutely breathtaking in its holiday splendor. The entire facade was draped in thousands of twinkling white lights, and enormous wreaths adorned every window. The circular driveway was lined with luminarias, creating a magical pathway to the front entrance. "Wow," Jonathan said softly as we pulled up to the mansion. "This is incredible. Your stepmother certainly knows how to create a beautiful setting." As we walked up to the front door, I could hear laughter and conversation coming from inside. Through the large windows, I could see elegantly dressed guests mingling in the grand foyer, champagne glasses in hand, looking like something out of a holiday magazine spread. The door was opened by Harrison, Vivienne's longtime butler, who greeted us with professional warmth. "Miss Natasha, Mr. Reed, welcome to Willowbrook Manor. May I take your coats?" As we entered the foyer, the first person I saw was Clarissa, stunning as always in a silver sequin dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She was surrounded by a group of admirers, holding court like the social butterfly she'd always been. "Natasha!" she called out when she spotted us, her voice carrying that perfectly practiced enthusiasm that never quite reached her eyes. "You made it!" And this must be the famous husband we've heard so little about. The emphasis on so little wasn't lost on me. It was Clarissa's subtle way of pointing out that Jonathan and I had kept our distance from the family, that we hadn't been sharing details about our marriage or our life together. "Clarissa, you look beautiful," I said diplomatically. "This is my husband, Jonathan. Jonathan, this is my stepsister, Clarissa." Jonathan extended his hand with genuine warmth. "It's wonderful to finally meet you, Clarissa. Natasha has told me so much about growing up here. This house is absolutely stunning." Before Clarissa could respond, I heard the unmistakable sound of Vivienne's heels clicking across the marble floor. She appeared in the doorway to the formal living room like she was making a grand entrance at a movie premiere. Vivienne Ashford was 52 years old, but she looked at least a decade younger thanks to what I suspected was some very expensive cosmetic work. Her platinum blonde hair was styled in an elegant updo, and she wore a champagne-colored designer gown that probably cost more than Jonathan and I had spent on our entire wedding. "Natasha, darling," she said, approaching us with arms outstretched for air kisses that didn't actually make contact with my cheeks. "How lovely that you could join us for the holidays. And this must be your husband." She turned to Jonathan with the kind of smile that I recognized immediately, the one she used when she was evaluating someone, trying to determine their worth and social status within seconds of meeting them. "I'm Vivienne Ashford," she said, extending her hand like she expected him to kiss it rather than shake it. "Natasha's mother." "Stepmother," I corrected quietly, but she either didn't hear me or chose to ignore the distinction. Jonathan shook her hand politely. "Mrs. Ashford, thank you so much for including us in your beautiful celebration. I'm Jonathan Reed." I watched Vivienne's face carefully as she processed his name. Reed wasn't immediately recognizable like some billionaire surnames, and Jonathan's modest appearance clearly didn't trigger any recognition of wealth or status. "Reed," she repeated thoughtfully. "I don't believe I'm familiar with your family. Are you from the area?" "Originally from the West Coast," Jonathan replied easily, "but I've been living on the East Coast for several years now." "And what is it that you do for work?" Vivienne asked, her tone becoming slightly sharper. This was always her first line of interrogation with new people. Establish their profession, their earning potential, their social standing. "I work in business management," Jonathan said simply. It wasn't technically a lie, but it was certainly an understatement of epic proportions. I could see Vivienne's expression shift slightly. Business management could mean anything from middle management at a corporation to running a small local business. Without more specific information, she couldn't place Jonathan in her carefully constructed social hierarchy. "How interesting," she said with that fake smile. "Well, come along then. Let me introduce you to some of our other guests." As we moved through the crowd, I could feel Vivienne's subtle disapproval radiating from every interaction. She introduced Jonathan to her friends with phrases like "Natasha's husband from the West Coast" or "Jonathan who works in business," never with the kind of enthusiasm she showed when talking about Clarissa's latest achievements or social connections. The worst part was watching how her friends responded to those introductions. I could see them quickly assessing Jonathan's suit, his watch, his shoes, trying to determine his net worth based on visual clues. When they couldn't immediately place him as someone important or wealthy, their interest visibly waned. "So, Jonathan," said one of Vivienne's socialite friends, a woman named Penelope who wore more diamonds than a jewelry store display, "what exactly do you manage in your business management position?" Jonathan handled the question with grace, giving vague but polite answers about overseeing operations and strategic planning. But I could see that his reluctance to be more specific was being interpreted as evasiveness, as if he was embarrassed about his job or trying to hide something. During cocktail hour, the questions and subtle judgments continued. Someone asked where we lived, and when I mentioned Millbrook, there were exchanged glances and raised eyebrows. Millbrook was a nice area, but it wasn't Riverside Heights elite. It was where successful middle-class professionals lived, not where someone worthy of the Ashford family would reside. Millbrook, Vivienne repeated, with barely concealed disdain. How quaint. I suppose it's more affordable than some areas. The word affordable hung in the air like an insult. In Vivienne's world, needing to consider affordability was a character flaw, a sign of inferior breeding and social status. By the time we moved into the formal dining room for dinner, I could feel the familiar knot of anxiety forming in my stomach. The dining room was spectacular, with a table that could easily seat 20 people, set with china and crystal that had probably been in the Ashford family for generations. I found myself seated between Jonathan and a man I didn't recognize, while Vivienne held court at the head of the table like a queen presiding over her subjects. As the first course was served, the conversation flowed around topics I knew were carefully chosen to exclude Jonathan and me: mutual friends we didn't know, charity galas we hadn't attended, vacation destinations we hadn't visited. It was during the main course that things really started to go downhill. Someone mentioned a recent article in the financial news about successful young entrepreneurs, and Clarissa immediately launched into a story about her latest business venture. I'm actually in the process of launching my own interior design firm, she announced proudly. We're going to specialize in luxury residential projects, working with clients who really understand quality and have the budget to create something truly spectacular. Everyone at the table murmured appreciatively, asking questions about her plans and offering connections that might help her business succeed. Then Vivienne turned to me with that fake, interested expression she wore when she wanted to make a point. And what about you, Natasha? Are you still doing that little consulting thing you mentioned? The way she said little consulting thing made it sound like I was running a lemonade stand rather than a legitimate business. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment, but I tried to keep my voice steady. Yes, I'm still helping small business owners develop their business plans and marketing strategies. It's been really rewarding to see some of my clients succeed and grow their companies. How wonderful, Vivienne said with that condescending smile. It's so important to have hobbies that keep you busy. Though I suppose with Jonathan's business management position, you probably need the extra income. The implication was crystal clear. In Vivienne's mind, my work wasn't a career choice or a passion. It was a financial necessity because my husband didn't make enough money to support us properly. The entire table fell silent, everyone suddenly very interested in their dinner plates. I felt Jonathan's hand find mine under the table, squeezing gently in support. But I could also sense his tension, the way his jaw tightened slightly at Vivienne's not-so-subtle insult. That's when I realized this evening wasn't going to end well. Vivienne was just getting started, and she had 8 more courses to work through before dessert was served. The tension at the dinner table was thick enough to cut with a knife as we moved through the remaining courses. Vivienne seemed to be warming up, using each new topic of conversation as an opportunity to take subtle jabs at Jonathan and me. Her friends were clearly picking up on her cues, joining in with their own barely veiled criticisms. You know, said Penelope, swirling her wine glass dramatically. It's so refreshing to meet young people who are still finding their way in the world. Not everyone can be born into success, after all. Her words were directed at Jonathan, but her eyes kept darting to me as if she was waiting to see how I would react to watching my husband be patronized by a woman who had never worked a day in her life. Jonathan remained remarkably composed throughout all of this, answering questions politely but briefly, never rising to the bait when someone made a condescending comment about working-class values or the importance of understanding one's place in society. But I could see the storm building in Vivienne's eyes. She wasn't satisfied with the subtle approach anymore. The wine had loosened her tongue, and her natural cruelty was beginning to show through the thin veneer of holiday politeness. As the dessert course was being served, an elaborate chocolate soufflé that probably required hours of preparation, Vivienne raised her crystal wine glass and called for everyone's attention. I'd like to propose a toast, she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the ornate dining room, to family, and to the importance of knowing where we come from and who we really are. Everyone raised their glasses obediently, but I noticed several uncomfortable glances being exchanged around the table. Even Vivienne's most loyal friends seemed to sense that something unpleasant was about to happen. You see, Vivienne continued, her voice becoming louder and more theatrical. I've been thinking a lot lately about legacy, about what we pass down to the next generation, about the difference between people who build something meaningful and people who just exist. Her eyes were fixed directly on Jonathan and me now, and there was no mistaking her target. Some people, she went on, her voice dripping with fake sympathy, spend their whole lives pretending to be something they're not. They marry into families, hoping to elevate themselves. But they never quite understand that breeding and class can't be bought or borrowed. The silence in the room was deafening. Even the serving staff, who had been quietly clearing plates and refilling wine glasses, seemed to freeze in place. I felt my face burning with humiliation and anger. This wasn't subtle anymore. This was a direct, public attack on my marriage, my character, and my worthiness to be part of this family. Vivienne, my father's voice cut through the tension from across the table. He had been quiet most of the evening, but now he looked genuinely distressed. Perhaps we should focus on celebrating Christmas rather than— "Oh, Thomas, darling," Vivienne interrupted him with a wave of her perfectly manicured hand. "I'm just being honest. Someone needs to say what everyone is thinking." She turned back to face Jonathan and me, and the expression on her face was pure malice. "I mean, really, Natasha, did you think we wouldn't notice? Did you think we couldn't see right through this little charade of yours?" "What charade?" I asked quietly, though my heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. "This whole act," Vivienne said, gesturing dismissively at Jonathan. "Bringing some nobody to our family dinner, expecting us to pretend he belongs here. Look at him, darling. Look at his cheap suit, his discount store shoes. Do you honestly think we can't tell the difference between quality and whatever this is?" Several people around the table shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Even Clarissa looked embarrassed by her mother's behavior, though she didn't say anything to stop it. "He's not worth your time, sweetheart," Vivienne continued, her voice taking on a mock maternal tone that made my skin crawl. "A man who can't even afford to live in a decent neighborhood, who has to let his wife work to make ends meet. You could do so much better if you just opened your eyes." That's when Jonathan finally spoke, his voice calm, but with an edge I'd never heard before. "Mrs. Ashford," he said quietly, "I think you've said enough." Vivienne's eyes lit up with cruel delight. She had finally gotten a reaction, and she was ready to go in for the kill. "Oh, have I?" She laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "Have I really said enough? Because I don't think I've even gotten started yet." She stood up from her chair, swaying slightly from the wine, and pointed an accusatory finger at Jonathan. "You want to know what I really think? I think you're a gold digger. I think you saw a vulnerable young woman from a wealthy family and decided to take advantage of her loneliness and daddy issues. Well, congratulations, you succeeded. But don't think for 1 second that we accept you as family." The words hit me like physical blows, not just because of their cruelty, but because I realized that this was what Vivienne had always believed about my marriage. This wasn't just holiday drama or too much wine talking. This was her genuine opinion of the man I loved. "You have no idea what you're talking about," I said, my voice shaking with emotion. "Don't I?" Vivienne's smile was triumphant now. "Natasha, darling, wake up. Look around this room. Look at the people here, the life we've built, the standards we maintain. And then look at what you've settled for." She gestured at Jonathan with obvious disgust. "A man who won't even tell us what he really does for work because he's embarrassed about his pathetic little job. A man who can't afford to buy his wife decent jewelry or take her on proper vacations. A man who—" Stop. The word came out of my mouth like a gunshot, silencing Vivienne mid-sentence. I stood up from my chair, my whole body trembling with a mixture of rage and humiliation that I'd never experienced before. "You don't know anything about my husband or my marriage," I said, my voice getting stronger with each word. "You don't know anything about love or respect or what it means to value someone for who they are instead of what they can buy you." Vivienne's face twisted with anger at being challenged in front of her guests. "How dare you raise your voice to me in my own home?" she hissed. "I've tried to be patient with you, tried to help you see reason, but you're too stubborn and too stupid to listen." "I'm not stupid," I shot back. "I'm just not shallow enough to measure a person's worth by their bank account or their zip code." That's when Vivienne completely lost control. Her face flushed red with fury, and she took a step toward me, her voice rising to a shriek. "You ungrateful little brat! After everything I've done for you, after all the opportunities I've given you to better yourself, this is how you repay me? By bringing this loser into our family and expecting us to pretend he belongs here?" "He does belong here," I said firmly. "He's my husband, and he's twice the person you'll ever be." The slap came without warning. Vivienne's open palm connected with my cheek with such force that I stumbled backward, my hand flying to my face in shock. The sound echoed through the dining room like a thunderclap, followed by gasps from several of the guests. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was my own ragged breathing as I stood there, my cheek burning where she had hit me, staring at my stepmother in complete disbelief. Then Jonathan stood up, and suddenly the entire atmosphere in the room changed. There was something in his posture, something in the way he carried himself, that I had never seen before. The mild-mannered, humble man I had married was still there, but underneath that was something else entirely. Something powerful and commanding that made everyone in the room unconsciously straighten in their chairs. "That," he said quietly, his voice carrying an authority that made Vivienne take an involuntary step backward, was a mistake. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone, speed-dialing a number while never taking his eyes off Vivienne's increasingly pale face. "Harrison," he said into the phone, "this is Jonathan Blackstone. I need you and the legal team at Willowbrook Manor immediately. Yes, that Willowbrook Manor, the one we own." The color drained completely from Vivienne's face as the implications of what she was hearing began to sink in. Around the table, her guests were whispering frantically, phones coming out as people began to search for information. "Wait," Vivienne stammered, her voice suddenly small and uncertain. "Blackstone? You said your name was Reed." "My name is Jonathan Reed Blackstone," he said calmly, still holding his phone. "Reed is my middle name. I'm the CEO of Blackstone Global Enterprises. And as of 6 months ago, when your family defaulted on the loans against this property, Willowbrook Manor belongs to me." The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop in that massive dining room as 20 people tried to process what they had just heard. Vivienne's legs seemed to give out, and she sank back into her chair, her face white as the Christmas snow falling outside the windows. "That's impossible," she whispered. "This house has been in my family for generations." "Not anymore," Jonathan said simply. "And neither has the Ashford textile business, or the downtown real estate portfolio, or any of the other assets that were used as collateral when your family's company went into debt 3 years ago." He looked around the room at the stunned faces of Vivienne's guests, many of whom were now openly staring at their phones, reading about Blackstone Global Enterprises and its 30-year-old billionaire CEO. "You want to know why I don't talk about my work?" Jonathan asked, his voice still calm but with an underlying steel that made everyone listen. "Because I've learned that when people find out how much money I have, they stop seeing me as a person. They see me as an opportunity, a target, or a threat, but never as just Jonathan." He turned back to Vivienne, who looked like she was about to faint. "My wife," he said, emphasizing the word with quiet pride, "fell in love with me when she thought I was just a guy who liked coffee and chocolate croissants. She married me for who I am, not what I own. And you just slapped the most genuine, loving, honest person I've ever met because you thought she was beneath you." The sound of car doors slamming outside indicated that Jonathan's legal team had arrived with impressive speed. Through the tall windows, I could see several black sedans pulling up the circular driveway. "What happens next," Jonathan said, looking directly at Vivienne, "is entirely up to you. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us."